You know, in the old days, they had like they had those wax seals they would press to like seal a letter.
The signet ring of
like
approval.
yeah, right. It's like, you know, that they're like, oh, you gotta sign this driver, or you gotta like authenticate this thing. Well, it's just gonna be an LLM based butt print that you just like sit in this like brown wax on the code, and then you know it's good.
You know, you could even take an offline verification approach as well. Like if you get creative with a little bit of wax, you could actually put
Yeah,
that on an envelope, and then someone would not only know that
yeah,
this envelope would just look like a weird imprint, like a balloon, but then at the end of the
yeah.
day, you would actually be able to use an LM to scan and be like, oh, this is a secret message from
Yeah. Oh,
Casey.
oh, yeah, yeah. The watermark, my butt watermark, so that you know it's really from me. Tamper-proof butt watermark.
This is the most cursed conversation I've ever had in my entire lifetime.
I
This is
aim to
absolutely
please.
fantastic. Hey,
I aim to
the
please.
modern web is fantastic. Honestly,
It's
we have
very
butt
good.
marks now.
Yes, absolutely. It's only going to get better with AI generation.
It truly will only get better. There's no downsides and only upsides coming. All right, so I did want to talk about something a little bit more specific here, because I saw this tweet, and this tweet got people pretty hot and bothered on the internet. Not only was I, but also the original creator of said tweet was referred to as racist for making this tweet, which is pretty outrageous.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it happens, okay? These things happen on the internet. You know, if you Twitter hard enough, you'll be called, like, honestly, if you're not
Right.
getting called racist, you're probably not Twittering properly. And
Right,
so
you're not
this one-
tweeting often enough.
you're just not tweeting often enough. That's all it is. All right, so
Yeah.
let me read the tweet, and then let's talk. I have a couple questions we'll kind of work through here. All right.
Okay.
You took a JavaScript bootcamp, made a few basic web apps like the tutorial showed you, and now you're writing engineer in your bio. You feel like an imposter because you are one, brother.
Okay.
Okay, first, gut reactions. How do you feel about that?
I guess what I'd say is I understand where the tweet is coming from. It's pretty obvious why someone would be frustrated, perhaps, with the general level of knowledge of quote unquote software engineers nowadays. So I can understand why someone would post something like this. On the other hand, I guess it's just like, yeah, you know, when I make a tweet like that, because we've all made tweets like that, I probably am not expecting everyone to just be like, great tweet. Yeah, good contribution. Right? Because like there's nothing in it really, right? It's just saying, hey, software engineers suck nowadays. I'm like, yep, newsflash.
So maybe so something I think is kind of an astute one is that right now you hear this a lot with people feeling like they're imposters, right?
Right.
That they feel like they don't belong.
Right.
And so there's like this whole thing that's going on where people feel like, they look at everyone else and therefore they're all better and why aren't they better? Or it does the inverse, which is they have these constant memes on TikTok where the senior engineer goes to the junior and the junior's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then the senior engineer responds with, I don't know what I'm doing. And that gets like 1 million views and everyone likes it, which I think probably stems from this exact same thing. What do you think is a root cause of imposter syndrome? And do you think this actually is kind of a funny introspection into what is causing imposter syndrome?
So I've never really understood imposter syndrome in any deep way. And so I've always kind of had to imagine that, because I sure I have similar feelings, but they're not imposter syndrome. Like I often constantly am like, wow, I am doing this thing that I'm doing better than I was doing it like last year. And I'm quite sure that in a year I'll be doing it completely differently and better than I'm doing it now. Ergo, right now I'm sucking. Right? Like just any honest examination of your trend line, I'm like, yep, right now I'm probably doing a number of things wrong that I will look back on in a year and go, well, that was dumb. And so I definitely understand the idea of looking, going, well, even if any honest appraisal of what I'm doing, even without any external evaluation, just looking at my own behavior, I can tell I'm screwing up, right? And that's just going to be true. So I understand the idea of going like, yeah, whatever I'm doing right now is not great. What I don't quite understand is the imposter syndrome part, because like sure, I could go online and find someone who's doing something better than me, but I can also go online and find people who have no idea what they're doing. So I'm not sure. It seems to me like people, when they have imposter syndrome, are perhaps uh, being overly negative with their self image because they're choosing to compare themselves to good people instead of just comparing themselves to people who have no idea what they're doing. At worst, no matter how bad you are at anything, at worst, you can easily find someone else on the internet who's that bad, right? In that job. That's not that hard. So I think imposter syndrome is more a case of being unrealistic about your comparisons. You're choosing to compare yourself to someone really good and say, "Oh, I'm imposter, I'm not that good." Okay, but instead, you should also consider like, oh, but also I could go look at all these people, right? People who write books on software engineering who have clearly no idea what they're doing. You can go into the Barnes and Noble and find someone who has no business telling anyone anything about software engineering. They've got a book on the shelf. So what I try to tell people whenever they talk about imposter syndrome is like, look, feeling insecure or feeling like you don't know what you're doing is a natural part of learning. Being better at something tomorrow means internalizing the fact that you are bad at it today, right? And for me, I've been programming for 30 years and I have never felt like I didn't get better year over year. And if I ever felt like I wasn't getting better year over year, I would panic because it's like programming is immensely complicated and there's always something to learn. So I would say, like, look, imposter syndrome, turn it around. Just turn that into a motivation to get better and don't worry about comparing yourself to other people because it would have been just as easy to find some total loser who like is sucks at programming and isn't getting any better because they just think they're great or something as it is to find some really good programmer and compare yourself to them and think, oh, I'm bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's actually it's the classic problem I see often, which is people aren't sober in their own judgment. It's very, very easy to look at something you're good at and think you're very, very good at it. And then you realize you're not good at it, and it kind of like shatters your world, like your world perspective. And a good example of this is when I was a kid, I was really good at video games. I thought I was fantastic. I could beat Battletoads. Few people could ever even beat Battletoads, let alone I could speedrun it. And then I started playing other games, and then the internet happened, and I learned something very, very valuable that day. I'm very good at video games. But the internet is very, very good at video games. And my realization of what is good is severely skewed. And so the difference between me, yes, I also could beat Contra. I beat Contra several times. The difference between what is good versus what is absolutely good is a huge gulf. And if you ever just sit there in your own bubble thinking you're fantastic, you will eventually meet someone that breaks your bubble, and then you go, man, okay, I'm actually not that good. There's plenty of levels left to become better. And so I just need to internalize that. And I also, like you, don't take things in the negative perspective, in the sense that when I see that I have a deficiency, that means there is a solution out there that the deficiency goes away. And I need to figure out how to get rid of that deficiency, because that is just like, it's actually, usually I take it as like a huge win, because now I see something I'm not good at. Now I have a chance to improve that thing if I so choose to. Whereas if you just never even know about it, you don't even get the chance to try to become better. And so, I mean, this is personally why I actually really liked this tweet, is because like people have to quit, like they have to quit realize, like they need to realize that just because you did one thing and you read a tutorial, it doesn't mean you're the thing. You can be on the way to the thing, and you should feel like you're not as good because you aren't good. Like, that's okay not being good. Like, take a moment to recognize the situation. And if you don't, you're just going to be in this, like, you'll never reach a point where you feel good. You will always feel perpetually terrible because you never learn to soberly judge.
Yes. And I guess what I would say is, the problem with the tweet in this case, it being a tweet, which is, designed for this sort of thing, and in fact reinforces this sort of thing. Like if she had posted what I had just said, for example, like, oh, imposter syndrome is a good example of how you can be self-reflective and go, oh, that means I'm bad at this thing. Don't take it as a negative. Take it as an opportunity for you to get better at the thing that you're doing. No one's going to retweet that. It's not going to have 5.2 thousand likes and 600 retweets, right? Yeah. You have to have, so one thing that I've learned, and it's really disgusting and disheartening to me, is that if I post something that's a complete answer to something, it's like, here is a very like in-depth description of something that completely covers it, and there's really nothing left to say. Here you go. No one cares about that, right? That is not interesting. What you need to post is something ambiguous and slightly incendiary. And that is what will get all of the attention, right? And it's very unfortunate because it means that this is actually the kind of tweet that it will get you more exposure and will get you more followers and all that sort of thing. And so you're always caught in this sort of nasty space on places like Twitter where you kind of gotta do what this tweet is doing. So at some level I'm like, yeah, she could have posted a tweet that was like more complete and had more of the story, and also no one would have read that tweet.
We would not
Right?
be here today talking about it.
Exactly.
It is a very perverse incentive. I've also definitely seen that if I tweet with a more negative one, I will get more interaction. And so I kind of realized that. And also, one thing I've also found is that I don't want to say it's like the Andrew Tate of, but like very red pill, take control of your destiny tweets also work in that exact same fashion. And so there is like two ones, but they have to be super terse, like you said, and almost incendiary to some sort of level, right? You either have to have the, high red pill or pretty negative, like some sort of incendiariness to make it go far, which is really just a bad way to communicate in general.
Yeah, it disincentivizes good communication. And part of the reason for that is because if you think about what the audience is for a tweet, there's like two components, right, of things that spread on social media. There's what is the potential total, like, largest possible audience for this tweet, right? And like when we talk about programming stuff, obviously that's, a limited audience to begin with, right?
Yeah,
like you're not going to hit
niche of a niche.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Prime. You're not going to hit Kim Kardashian numbers. I wish you would. Right? I love the show, but it's just not going to happen. Why? Because people look at a screen full of code stuff and they're like, I don't know what it is. Drooling now, I look away, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
But so there's a some maximum audience size, and then there's also just whether or not someone will feel the need to participate. And when you look at those two things, they argue for ambiguity on the one hand, because the total audience size, the more specific you are, the easier it is for someone to realize that they aren't really interested in that tweet. Like if I talk about clean code, for example, which one of my largest videos I ever did was on that. Why does that massively expand the audience size? Because everyone thinks they have something to say about that. It's the most ambiguous word you can use. Do you mean clean code, the book? Do you mean the principles of clean code? Do you mean what you personally think of as code that is good? Every programmer on earth thinks they have something to say about clean code. So the audience size is the maximum size, right? And then there's the other part, which, do I think I should participate in this? Again, if I talk about quaternions, no one will reply. Because everyone's like, I have 40 math. I don't even know. Yeah. Forget it. Right?
3 of them are imaginary. It's faker or whatever.
Forget it. What is the I? What's an I? Now there's a J and a K. The hell with this. You delete. Whereas on the other hand, if you talk about clean code, everyone thinks they know something about clean code. The worst program in the world would love to tell me how I'm wrong about clean code, right? So when you combine those two things together, that's how you get the biggest possible tweet or the biggest possible video. And it's unfortunate because it's not that useful for the world. That's just not. So, that's why I don't do a ton of them. I mean, that's the formula. Hey, everyone out there, you want to have a bunch of hit videos? There you go. Right? So, yeah. Anyway, sorry to go on a tangent here. We can go back to this tweet because there's plenty of things we can say about this tweet specifically. Certainly,
it's actually really hold on. I do want to say there is good in that, and I've been known to use this technique or two to garner some interactions, but then it allows for this type of talking to happen, which is one of, I'd say, the inverse benefit or inverse negativities for this one, if you will. Like really put a double negative on that one. It turns it into a positive because now we get the chance to talk about this, and there's been a large enough amount of people that people want to interact with this topic because of a tweet like this. And so I like it as a springboard, which is it's almost an interesting way to like get someone engaged enough so that they feel like they need to respond, only to give them like the old reversal where they feel confused because you just hit them with what they didn't expect.
So in a sense, you're sort of saying that this is like a forest fire. it's extremely scary when it happens and people die and houses are burned, but afterwards, for after a while, the beautiful trees regrow again and there's like a new lush forest.
I
And we
wouldn't
are the
have put it that way
forest right
with
now,
death and,
Prime.
and sadness.
Like we are the beautiful new trees right now. You and me, we are the beautiful lush forest rising out of the charred remains of this tweet. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
Okay. Totally fair. I can be that. I'll be a beautiful butterfly gently landing on a log.
Okay, lovely. A charred, horrifying log that also is part of a house.
Yes, yes, potentially. A little there's like a little stuffed animal from a child that like just charred on the ground there. Never will be loved again. Hmm.
All right, so let's swivel a little bit. What do you think about the current state of the influx of new engineers into? I mean, really, it's primarily into, I think, the web world. I think there's just a high enough barrier into, say, the recreational hardware world that they often don't immediately call themselves a professional and try to go get a job in that area. They kind of, they're just a recreational hardware person. They don't really have or pursuits or ambitions of becoming a full-time hardware person. Whereas with web development, the purpose I only see is, I mean, few people I find actually do pursue they pursue just building something. They learn web development as an incidental to like make something, but most people are learning it to get a job, to improve their life. And we're seeing like this huge glut of new people coming in, having a hard time finding a job and all that. What do you think is like the best from 0 to 60 for them to become an employable, productive member, if you will, of the web community and or greater programming community?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think unfortunately I would say my my experience over the past like 10 years or so, based on everything I've heard, uh, being an unfortunately semi-public programming persona means you get a lot. You hear, I mean, I'm sure you know this. You hear a lot of things from people that sort of inform your understanding of what's going on in the wider programming world, right? Um, and if I just go based on that, I would say that there's a unfortunate split difference, tension. I'm not sure what the right word is between good, like becoming a good programmer and getting a job or keeping a job, right? I would say my biggest criticism is really not, it has very little to do with the people. Like I wouldn't say that my concerns about modern programming or my concerns about the state of the industry have much to do with like new programmers, like people coming in who are new web programmers or trying to get a job or that sort of thing. My concern is more that we have generally set up an industry where that procedure, meaning getting a new job or keeping a job or getting promoted at a web company, or just we could say broadly a tech job, because most of them are going to be in that sort of a line of work. The things you are expected to do, know, say, or how you're supposed to behave have very little to do with good programming, in my experience. They tend to have more to do with like, do you have the ability to check off some boxes? Like, I know these weird frameworks that'll be gone in 6 months. They tend to be about things like, do you know how to use, Jira? Do you know what a Scrum meeting is or something like that? Do you want to sit in code reviews all day and talk about, whether or not you should have had an if statement here, or things like that? And so I would say that, maybe that's a skewed perspective, and I'm hearing those things from people, and they're not really true, right? It's like it's a distorted picture of the world. Because I mean, how should I know? I'm not out there in an entry level job or something like that. But on the other hand, if it was true, I think that environment and that set of things, or also I'll add to that what you're taught in CS classes, object oriented programming, things like this, the things they focus on, what's supposed to be important, uh, they're just not any of the things that I associate with good programming, or that I see the people who I respect as great programmers doing, right? And so to me, I would say, I don't know. I don't know where to approach a question like this. Like, you took a JavaScript boot camp, like, whoever Annie is said in this tweet, right? Well, like, I mean, to wrap my big rambling response I just said, up into a very short sentence, well, why isn't the Java bootcamp great? Like, why doesn't that teach you the right things to put you on a path to being a great programmer? Why do we have Java bootcamps JavaScript bootcamps that don't do that, right? And so to me, I think it's more an industry failing. And I don't look at the entry level programmers as the problem. I look at them and their trajectory as a symptom of our problem as an industry.
Interesting. Okay, then follow-up question. What is a solution to this?
A solution would be to the solution as it really only could be is if we had a concerted cultural shift, right? In the old days, if you rewind the clock back far enough, computers were primitive and slow to the point where you couldn't not be doing real programming. You had to basically tie what you did to what the computer was doing, because if there was a disconnect between those two things, your software either would not really run at all or would run so slow as to be unusable, right? And over time, basically what we've done is we've gotten into a point where computer hardware is so immensely powerful that even though it's kind of crappy and it's buggy and it's very it's laggy, it takes 2 seconds. I click on a web page and I'm waiting a little bit. It still works well enough that you can make a product out of it. If you don't really have any competitors who are shipping like really good stuff, you can do that. And so you look at the web, there were really no competitors for anything. Every little thing you do, you're like the first person there, right? And so as a result, you're just in this situation where culturally, there really isn't much of a knowledge of what programming actually has to be to produce high quality, low bug count, high performance software. As a result, all of the things we've generated as common core practices over the past 10, 15, 20 years are all completely fictional. None of them are grounded in actually measurable real world performance or low bug rate gains. And the way you know that is use any piece of software. Yeah. Go ahead and go on any piece of modern software. I don't care what it is. QuickBooks.
QuickBooks is notorious for this, by the way.
Gmail. Just naming massive pieces of software that everyone in the world uses. The GitHub. I don't care what it is.
If only there was a piece of software in the background that we could even say has bugs from time to time.
There you go, right? And you look at all these things and you're like, if any of these software practices were actually good, this software would be high quality. It's not doing very much, right? QuickBooks is a freaking spreadsheet. It's a glorified spreadsheet. Yeah. It's something we've known how to do since the 1970s, right? And so, I think that, again, it's like we have to get back to that if we want things to improve. The bad news is, again, without more competition, there's not that much incentive. What's the incentive to improve? What's the incentive for QuickBooks to improve? You need a bunch of QuickBooks competitors that are baller. And unfortunately, that's a really, when you look at the effects of like lock-in and state and all of these things, incumbents stay around for a long time in the way the world works now. So it's a little bit late. And so, yeah, how do we fix it? I don't know. If I knew how to convince people to start taking more responsibility for the quality of the software, believe me, I would have done it. I have no idea. Do you have an answer? I would love to know if someone did.
We have this thing that we've been saying a lot on my particular team that I'm on, which is we need to create a culture of performance. And we mean that in the sense of being able to write high reliability, creamy smooth feeling experiences. And so that's like this whole kind of mantra we've been having, because there's this internal problem where you can't pass CI without running it 3 times, just due to reliability. When I got onto a project, there was less than 1/9 of reliability internally, meaning that it was like at 83% of the time, your test would run successfully. And that's not just because people are uploading bad code. It's just because like device reservation failed. Another part of it failed. Installing the correct version of of our platform failed. Restarting the thing failed. Like there's so many different places in which something failed, and all of a sudden you have this like completely unreliable platform that is going on, and no one has a good solid reason as to why or how frequent and what this does to developers. And then on top of it, measuring performance in a real way is extremely difficult, because if you just go with something like Puppeteer, is you also have to say you have to run the WebSocket connection from your tester to the testee to try to get it back out, unless if you're exposing like underlying V8 ones, but then that doesn't work on all platforms, and then you can't, there's all these like problems about trying to measure this stuff from happening. And so just trying to build this idea that we're a performance first place and we're doing it within the company is starting to kind of change some mindsets. How can we make things better? Like, how is this not number one priority? And it should always have been number one priority, because it ultimately makes the best experience. Because let's just face it, when I go into my living room and I turn on Amazon Prime because I'm renting a movie and I press the search button, I get search anxiety every single time, because I know I'm about to use an on-screen keyboard, and this is going to be the slowest, most painful experience of my lifetime. And every time it loads videos, I know I got a second and a half wait. Every time I press down, I know I got a half, 3/4 of a second wait. And I have to like count in my head, 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
And you're like, all right, got it. Like, dude, I overshoot it, I undershoot, and like I'm just like, I literally start sweating when I know I'm have to use an on-screen keyboard. And it's like, we got to fix that. And so it's been this kind of mantra, but I don't know if it's actually fixable, because you still have to convince everybody else that once you hit this plateau of like it's starting to get better, that you can't stop there. Like, you can't stop at the good enough. Like, you have to keep going. And that's where I find the hardest part to be, is that you will make some sort of milestone. And when you make that milestone, everyone quits trying. Oh. They just turn off. They're just gone, right? And that's I find to be the hardest part about doing a culture change.
I mean, I don't know. I really don't. One of the things that's really interesting to me, and that I think is scary, is... So I think it would be one thing if the people who made that Amazon search thing were like, well, that was horrible. And we never, like, that was a huge, colossal mistake. Like, and everyone was fired, and right, or whatever, right? But actually what I encounter the majority of the time is like this excuse parade is the term I usually use for it, where people try to explain to me that, like, I just don't understand that the Amazon search bar, like 1.5 seconds is like a really reasonable number for like how long it takes you to type in a letter, right? And so I think like one easy step we could make in the culture is if we could somehow get programmers to realize that anything that doesn't run at least at 60 frames per second on modern hardware is probably just garbage. Modern hardware, even your Roku box, is so incredibly powerful compared to anything that a search box needs to do. And the internet is so incredibly fast. Like, the ping times from most people's internet, even in rural America, is such that you should be able...
It's like 100 milliseconds is like tops I've seen.
100 milliseconds is 10 frames a second, people. You're getting your results back in 10 frames a second, okay? The results are coming back at that speed. And so when you think about it in those terms, where like really everything should be running at 60 frames a second, and at most there should be 100 milliseconds of delay on anything that really can't be cached locally. Like, it's like it literally has to go out for some reason. That means 10 frames a second for the most latent response, and 60 frames a second of graphical update while that's happening is a bare minimum. Most people should be experiencing much higher than 60, right?
Yeah.
Like 240 if they've got the monitor for it, for something like a web app, easily, right? And so when we're talking about the numbers we're seeing, when we're talking about 1.5 seconds, and when you said that thing about Amazon, like, I've literally experienced that same on a PlayStation 5.
And that
runs Horizon Forbidden West.
PlayStation 3s were used as supercomputers, and this is 2 generations later. Like, this is great hardware.
It's insane. And so I think, like, the main thing we could start with on the cultural shift is going, look, a text box should be running at thousands of frames a second uncapped, no matter what it's doing. And the results, like I said, whatever the internet ping speed is, that's your result back and forth. And anything less than that, that means there's a massive amount of code in the way. Now, it might be tempting to say, well, who cares? I don't care if my customers have this bad experience. I think that's misguided because we have a lot of studies that show that customers interact more, they spend more, they engage more with any service that's performant. So I think you're going against the data there. Even in a business case, you're losing money for your company if you have that bit. But even if you want to ignore that, what I would say is all your other metrics are downstream of performance. And the reason for this is because code is very fast when it doesn't have much code. That's how it works. If there's very little code happening, then it is very fast.
Yep.
So
the old classic performance mantra. If you could just not, it will be faster.
If you could just not. That means less bugs. So if you just take out all of the 50 layers of like this script called that script, called out to Python, went back into the JavaScript container library, Docker component, running the virtual version of this version of the C runtime library, which called back, like if you just took all that out and just had the line that says, you know, A plus B, instead of the 20,000 interpreters you took to run that, right? All of a sudden you get many things. The software runs much faster, but it also is less buggy because you're not dependent on this massive stack of 5 million lines of code that not only did you not write, but that you don't understand. And not you don't understand because you're stupid. You don't understand because no one does.
Yeah.
No one understands 5 million lines of code. Not me, not anybody, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's where we're at.
I'm on your team. To kind of back up your earlier assertion with that is that there's this interesting study I convinced my company to do, which was I took out an autoplay feature that would cache and start downloading all the videos around where you're at, including the one you're highlighting on, because I was observing high memory usage. And high memory usage is often asserted with problems that just happen generally on device. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take this out. And everyone's like, no. We proved this was a win. It increased revenue. It did all this. Like, your test will cost us money. Like, it is really a bad idea. We shouldn't do this. And it took me about 2 years of asking people, and I went to so many meetings and really like put in full ass effort to get this done. And eventually I kind of skirted around most people and found one person. I won't name her, but she was a champion, and she was like, yeah, you could just probably, just do it. And so I went through and I did it. And then guess what? We made more money. Revenue increase. We turned off things that made objectively better experience. Play delay went up. Revenue also went up. And the real reason why is that the underlying issue was that OOMs and various ways of the app crashing went down, which means that people ended up using the app more, which it meant that we actually got more revenue because people were more satisfied despite having an objectively worse experience, if you will. And so it's like kind of this funny thing that we made it worse by making it better.
One of the other things about that too is you see a lot of that kind of thing introduced largely instead of fixing whatever the underlying problem actually was. As we said, there's not that much ping time between you and most servers wherever you are. So you have to ask yourself, well, why did we need all of this like, predictive caching behavior going on? Like, did we really need to get video playback startup down to this very low time? Or was it that we had all of this other garbage in the way, and that's actually why we need this caching to overcome a bunch of other code that we should have just fixed that other code instead, right? And you do see a lot of those things where people are like putting systems on top of systems on top of systems to try and improve the performance instead of just going, why was the underlying performance bad in the first place? And again, they just introduced lots of bugs, cache and validation problems, like you say, memory usage problems, which of course on devices like phones can create crashes and all those sorts of other things. It's a problem.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up your info really quickly. People are asking, who is it? Oh, we're almost there. Give it. There it is. I'm going to pull up yours. There we go. Anyway, because people are asking, who do we have on here?
Yeah, that's me.
There you go. Casey. Hey, this was great. Right. I appreciate this. We should.
I'm glad I made it on.
We should try to do this more often. Like, we get something like quarterly and talk about some good issues. If you ever see anything, please feel free to toss it my way, and we'll talk about some sweet pressing issue of the day.
I am totally down for it. I have one question. Why is this on Montana time? What's
up with that? The Lord's time. I don't know if you know this. The North Coast is the best coast.
But you do web programming, and like when I think of web programming stuff, it's all West Coast. It's Pacific Standard Time, baby. There's no Montana time. What's in Montana?
As someone who grew up in Montana, as part of like the birthing process, you are handed a very nice hospital to be a part of, and they want to make sure everything's clean and all that. And then the next thing you get a gift bag, and it contains like an "I hate California" sticker, "I hate Washington" sticker, Oregon sucks, right? Like you're taught from a very young age. You get a
Okay.
plushie that says it, that you hate the West Coast
Okay.
and North
Okay.
Coast, best coast, and so it's just like
Okay.
that's the Montanan way of thinking, and so it's just who I am. I can't help it. I spent 27 years there of my 37, and I'm very happy about my time spent there.
Okay. All right. Well, I will wake up at 7:30 a.m. for some reason, not a real programming time. Just pointing that out. Uh Anytime you want, Prime. You just let me know when, and we'll have another chat.
Thank you. I genuinely appreciate that. My wife just sent me a message saying that she actually liked this discussion. You did a great job, Casey.
I love being on the show, as I've said many times. I absolutely love your show, and I absolutely love your approach and attitude. It's one of the most fun things to be on, and it balances out my natural acidity. So I absolutely love it. Please keep doing what you're doing. It's been a pleasure being on, and yeah, I will see you next time.
Yeah, I'll message you sometime after this. We'll keep chatting.
Sounds
Take
good.
care, Casey. Casey's just so good. By the way, if you don't know Casey, you're a fool. Honestly, Casey is a true champion. So I hope everybody takes the time to follow Casey. Always have been such a big fan of what he does. He's an extremely talented engineer. I forgot to even give him the chance to tell you guys what he does. I know he's in the game engine world. I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to game programming. I tried to do my own game programming one time, and I ended up doing like 7 levels of OO because I was taught OO. Just like he said, I was taught OO and all that stuff in college, and I was gosh darn awful at it. And now look at me. Now I don't do 7 levels. You have to do 7 levels of hell before you realize you shouldn't do 7 levels of hell. It's just part of the learning process. Anyways, fantastic discussion. Please take your time. Go follow Casey. Absolutely, dude. Movable game object is unironically hilarious. And if you have not written a class called movable game object, you're not a real game programmer. You have to at least write it one time, and then go, wow, that was a bad idea. Dante's Oferno. I still do 7 levels. Oh gosh.